Picture this. It's December 2025. India's biggest airline, IndiGo, the one that flies more than half of the entire country's passengers, just stops. It wasn't one single thing that went wrong. It was a total system-wide collapse. So in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and break down exactly how this happened, piece by painful piece.
All right, let's just jump straight into the chaos. That first week of December was something else. We're talking about a level of operational failure that Indian aviation had, well, never seen before.
And the scale of it, it's just mind-boggling. In a single week, more than 2,000 flights were canceled. This wasn't some minor inconvenience. This was the primary way people travel across the country, paralyzed.
And you can see on this timeline just how fast the whole thing fell apart. I mean, it started out as maybe 30 or 40 cancellations a day. Not great, but manageable. Then it just exploded. By that Friday, December 5th, nearly half of the airline's entire daily schedule was just gone, wiped out.
The result for people on the ground? It was a human catastrophe. Airports all over the country basically turned into these massive, chaotic holding pens. You had tens of thousands of people stranded, no information, nowhere to go, right as the holiday season was kicking off. Just a nightmare. So this brings us to the real mystery at the heart of this whole thing. The airline's first explanation was crew constraints. But that just leads to a really obvious question, doesn't it? Yeah, where did all the pilots go? Turns out they weren't sick, they hadn't quit, they weren't on strike. They were grounded. Grounded by a brand new government regulation that had just gone into effect, a rule that was actually designed to make flying safer by preventing pilot fatigue. These rules are called Flight Duty Time Limitations, or FDTL for short. You can think of them as the official rulebook that says exactly how long pilots can work and, crucially, how much rest they have to get. It's all about preventing fatigue, which is, a huge safety risk. And this table really shows you what a huge shift these new rules were. Weekly rest time went up, which is good, but the real killer, the one that caused all the problems, was the change to night flying. Look at this. This was the poison pill right here. The maximum number of times a pilot could land a plane at night per week was slashed from 6 all the way down to just 2. That's a massive 66% cut in pilot availability for all those critical late-night flights. And this is the key thing to understand. It created what's called a transition trap. The airline had pilots who still had hours left to fly that week. But because they had already done their 2 night landings, they were legally barred, unusable for the very flights that desperately needed a crew. But hang on. A new regulation, even a really tough one, shouldn't be enough to cause a total collapse of an airline this big. To really get why this happened, you have to look under the hood at the airline's own business strategy, a high-risk model that was all about efficiency with almost no safety net. Industry analysts have a name for it, the buffer deficit strategy. And it means exactly what it sounds like, running the airline with zero slack. No extra pilots on standby, no spare planes sitting around just in case. Every single plane, every single pilot is scheduled to be working all the time. Why? To keep costs as low as humanly possible. And this really lays out the fundamental trade-off they made. IndiGo went all in on that ultra-efficient model you see on the left. Maximum use, super low costs, but incredibly vulnerable when something goes wrong. A more resilient airline has that extra buffer capacity. It costs more, sure, but it can absorb a shock. IndiGo had no buffer, at all. So what happened when that new rule hit their system? They found themselves short just 65 captains. Now, 65 might not sound like a huge number for an airline with thousands of pilots, but in a system with zero wiggle room, a tiny 2.7% gap was enough to set off a chain reaction that grounded hundreds and hundreds of flights. Okay, so we've got a pilot shortage from a new rule hitting an airline that was built to be fragile. But that wasn't the end of it. Believe it or not, 2 other major problems slammed into this crew crisis at the exact same moment. It was, quite literally, the perfect storm. The first problem was with the hardware. A serious defect was found in the Pratt & Whitney engines on many of their planes. This meant that before this whole pilot mess even started, nearly a quarter of IndiGo's entire fleet, around 70 planes, was already grounded and out of action. So you can see this chain reaction building. First, not enough pilots. Then, not enough planes. And then, right on cue, the third and final ingredient for a total collapse arrived: the predictable winter fog that blankets North India every year. Now, here's the thing about landing in dense fog. You can do it, but your pilot needs a special certification. It's called Cat 3B. And because IndiGo's rosters were in complete chaos, they often didn't have a qualified pilot on the plane that was heading into foggy Delhi. So even if they had a working plane and the airport was open, the flight still had to be canceled.
Well, when you have a meltdown of this size, one that basically paralyzes the country's transportation network, you can bet the government is going to step in. And they did. The aftermath was a mix of punishment, emergency relief, and a huge financial headache for the airline.
Regulators came down hard on the leadership, issuing legal notices demanding they explain themselves. But at the same time, to get the country moving again, they gave the airline a temporary pass on the very fatigue rules that triggered the crisis. They also put caps on airfares and ordered the airline to give everyone their money back immediately. The stock market's reaction was, as you'd expect, swift and brutal. The airline's share price tanked by almost 11% in a single week. Investors were panicking because they realized the company's famous low-cost model was, at its core, broken. And that government order to give refunds, it had a very real, very painful price tag. The airline was forced to pay out something like $73 million right away. That is a massive drain on your cash reserves at the absolute worst possible moment. You know, when you put it all together, this analyst report really just says it all. It calls the crisis a man-made disaster, and that's because none of this was a surprise. The new rules were announced well in advance, the engine problems were a known issue, and winter fog in Delhi, it happens every single year. This wasn't bad luck, it was a foreseeable failure of strategy.
And that really leaves us with a much bigger question, one that goes way beyond this one airline. In this relentless drive for ever lower costs and maximum efficiency, are we accidentally building systems, not just in travel, but in supply chains, in our whole economy, that have become too lean, too optimized, and ultimately just too fragile to handle the shocks that we know are coming?